The area surrounding Southwest 3rd and Salmon in downtown Portland is an area with a rich and changing history. And a few years back, I posted 3 different videos in what I call my Sketchy history series. And I want to repost them as a sort of trilogy here because, one, I've been trying to repost some old documentary pieces that I did when I was a really small channel, didn't really get any views, and now that I'm a larger channel, people that totally missed this before can see it. But also, because I did these videos a few years ago, 2 of them have recently been demonetized, and so I either had the choice to just let that happen or remove music that I just didn't credit properly, because back when I was doing these videos, I wasn't even really thinking about monetization, so I was making little mistakes like that. But I had the choice of either letting it get demonetized or removing the music and having the audio be a little bit screwy. And so I really have 2 motivations for reposting this stuff. So in this video, I am going to discuss a little bit of the history at the start. If you want to skip that, here's where you can skip to just start getting into the 3 videos that are going to be slightly altered just to make it all make sense. And so to get things started, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the history surrounding the area of 3rd and Salmon. And then we're going to get into the history of the Lounsdale Square restroom, the Reed Hotel, and, saving for the end, the Lotus Card Room and Cafe, among the many names it went under. So in the earlier years of Portland history, the real center of commerce was close to the river and fairly north. Morrison Street was kind of considered generally towards the south end of town, and now it's right in the middle of the downtown area. And the general area around where the Skidmore Fountain is today, that was a major hub of commerce, and a lot of circumstances have led to a change in that regard, where the main center of commerce moved further south and further inland, much closer to the vicinity of 3rd and Salmon, which has a very interesting history to it. It's where the plaza blocks are located, or at least it's where Lounsdale Square is located. And I've talked about the history of that place and the other original plaza block, which is Chapman Square, both very old Portland park spaces. I've talked about, I had a whole video covering the history of when those 2 park blocks were segregated, not based on race, but based on sex. And it was primarily done to protect women from men following them around and harassing them. Chapman Square was just for women and children, unless, of course, the woman had a chaperone. If it was a woman with her husband and child, that was okay. But if you were just some dude looking to hook up, you couldn't go to Chapman Square. And if you sat down and started bothering a woman, she would immediately get up and find the nearest officer, and that guy would get arrested. And he would have a plethora of excuses why what he was doing there in Chapman Square was totally innocent. And then Lounsdale Square was just for the men, and that's why if you go there today, there's specifically a men's restroom in Lounsdale Square and specifically a women's restroom in Chapman Square. So Lounsdale Square has an interesting history to it. Beyond being the block for the guys, it's also, as I just mentioned, where the men's restroom was located, and that is the focus of the first history I'm going to cover. And the Reed Hotel was located right across Salmon Street from there. It was technically more along 4th and Salmon, but with that being right there, Lounsdale Square being on Salmon between 3rd and 4th, and Lotus being at 3rd and Salmon, but across 3rd, 3rd and Salmon's really the intersection that ties them all together. And this was an area that gradually became the lesser-known Skid Row area. much less known than the one to the north. Over time, it became, it was just a collection of hotels, bars, you know, the usual things you see in an area that's generally considered blighted. And it was the area that was just immediately north of where the massive South Auditorium urban renewal project happened, which wiped out everything south of there, pretty much. It stretched up to Jefferson Street, which is only a couple blocks south of Salmon. So a lot of what was here was barely able to survive that. And I'm almost kind of surprised. I mean, I would expect them to save the plaza blocks, but I'm almost kind of surprised they didn't stretch it up to maybe even Taylor Street, because there was a lot of kind of rundown hotels in the area, and that's a focus of two of the locations that I'm covering here, the Reed Hotel and the Lotus, which was, it originally opened as the Hotel Albion. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. So it has kind of a dark hotel history too. And that was very much how things were. And it was an interesting combination because also you had just diagonal across 4th and Salmon, you had the courthouse. And then 2 blocks south of there, generally speaking, you had City Hall. So you had this area that was starting to get filled in over time with a higher criminal element and just a lot of people looking for trouble, a lot of people making trouble. And you've got the local government right there as well. Like, you could be in City Hall, look outside and see some of the things that were going on. It was a very interesting but very troubled time. And because of how blighted the area became, sure, it wasn't part of the South Auditorium urban renewal project, but a lot of what was around there would disappear over time. The block immediately south of Chapman Square, just 2 blocks south of Salmon. I keep wanting to mix up Salmon and Taylor all the time. I mean, they are next to each other, but anyway, that block also got removed, and that's where Terry Shrunk Plaza is today. That was literally just a block full of old rundown buildings. And then you cross Jefferson Street just to the south of there, and you're in the South Auditorium area. That was pretty much almost everything was torn down and replaced with something else. But you had the Lotus right there. You had the Reed half a block away. You also, along 3rd, you had the Hamilton, and you had the Lenox. I was about to say, what was the other one? And, you know, a lot of these places were just kind of run down. And by the 90s, a lot of these were gone. The Reed Hotel was gone even earlier than that. And the Lotus managed to stay around, but primarily because of the bar that was on the first floor, which was, you know, maintained popularity over the years. But, I mean, upstairs, you can tell even just by trying to look through the windows, you could see the upstairs by the time the Lotus was torn down really hadn't been used for a long time. So anyway, it's just a very interesting place, but in particular, it's interesting because of the sketchy history of its past. And that obviously ties into these 3 pieces I'm going to show you. So I'm going to show them in chronological order in terms of when I produced them. So first we'll be showing the Lounsdale Square restroom, and after that, the Reed, and then finishing things off with the Lotus. So if you've seen these videos before, I mean, there will be a few adjustments. I might make a few additions. And also, if you haven't, if you're a new subscriber or haven't dug through my insanely large catalog of over like 1,000 videos, these are mostly from a few years ago, so you might be viewing these for the first time, and I hope you enjoy them. And all of that said, let's get into this history. When it comes to sketchy little places around Portland, I started with the old Burger King that once stood on Burnside Street, and followed it with the history of O'Brien Square just down the road. After that, what would be the next logical place to go? How about a public restroom? This is the men's public restroom, although it appeared closed when I visited, at Lonsdale Square, the northernmost block in Portland's Plaza Blocks. It is surrounded by 3rd Avenue, Main Street, 4th Avenue, and Salmon Street. And there's plenty of sketchy history from this area, especially the further back you go. But today, it just sits here, a relic of the past with an uncertain future. The restroom, that is. When I passed it by in August 2022, it was definitely locked up for potentially several reasons. One is constant vandalism. Another is the fact that while it's surrounded on the east and west by courthouses, it's been a frequent place for protests, including the George Floyd protests back in 2020. As one might expect, reviews of the square are a mixed bag, especially in relation to its men's room. One reviewer in 2020 expressed the park was cute, but that the restroom was disgusting. A 2018 review mentioned used needles all over the restroom floor. Not exactly a shock. And another review mentioned that the sinks didn't even work. But arguably, the most concerning aspect of the restroom in recent years is its uncomfortable lack of doors. According to the city council, the doors that had once been there were removed after years of constant drug activity and vandalism. In essence, meaning everyone can see the crooked crap you're trying to do in there, so stop, please. The removal also included the doors to the stalls, unless they were already gone before then, I'm actually not sure. This received blowback from some citizens who felt it was a little messed up to have no privacy while relieving yourself, while at the same time subjecting people walking past along Salmon Street to said self-relief. Apparently in 2014, a tarp was put up over the entrance as a band-aid solution, I guess. However, as time's gone by, it appears the easiest solution has just been to close the thing up altogether. While looking into this element of the restroom's history, I noted that downtown Portland public restroom drama was and has been a widespread issue. I even saw that in 2005, an advocacy group called Public Hygiene Lets Us Stay Human was established. Yeah, their acronym is FLUSH. And while we've only just begun talking about this place, you may be wondering, where's the women's room? Don't worry about it. It's just over here, 1 block away, in the block known as Chapman Square. And why are these two restrooms so far apart? Well, that gives us an opportunity to go back in history. You see, these two blocks used to be willingly segregated, not based on race, but based on sex. Once upon a time, it was only men that frequented Lonsdale Square, while the women stayed over in Chapman Square. While this idea may sound bizarre today, some women actually saw it as an asset, with it being quite taboo for any man to venture onto Chapman Square soil. If a woman was being followed or harassed by a man, sometimes all she had to do was go to Chapman Square to get away from him. This accepted segregation is the explanation for why these restrooms are a block apart. Now, obviously, this is ancient history now, at least to most of us.
And while this area, in park years, can also be considered ancient, I cannot say for certain exactly when the restroom here was first constructed.
While I could not nail down an exact construction date for the restroom at Lonsdale Square, a 1930s newspaper article referenced its existence prior to the 1905 Lewis and Clark Exposition. The restroom in Chapman Square was constructed in 1907, at a high cost for the time. By the late 30s, the restrooms in the plaza blocks were described as ancient steel sheet structures, leading to them being replaced in 1938 by brick structures.
An editorial from 1910 addressed the fact that, even by that point, the restroom had been neglected and fallen into disrepair. At the time, it was described as dark and bleak and in need of windows, which it has today. The writer of this editorial stated, "To call such a place sanitary is to abuse the word." So even in its early years, this particular spot had a bad reputation. But aside from its general neglect, if there was anything this particular restroom was known for in its first several decades of existence, it was the secrets that some needed to keep by going there. And by secrets, I mean the concealing of one's sexuality. This first came to prominence in 1912 with the revelations of local prominent attorney and Democratic member Edward McAllister. One day, a young boy was busted for shoplifting at a local store. Upon apprehension, he claimed he only stole because he'd been corrupted by several men. This sparked a massive witch hunt of any possible homosexuals in the city who may have been engaging in, let's just call it, impure behavior. Ultimately, almost 70 individuals were arrested, with numerous court cases to follow. This brought on a scandal involving Edward McAllister, who was ultimately charged with having a sex act with a 30-year-old man in his own office. Another man, Horace Tabb, claimed that while using the Lonsdale Square restroom in the fall of 1911, that he was approached and prepositioned by McAllister. This massive scandal that rocked and bewildered the city at the time, however, was only the beginning. All the way up through the 1960s and likely even longer, the Lonsdale Square men's restroom became a frequent spot for what were called clandestine gay encounters. It was dark, concealed, and about as safe a place to hide a same-sex encounter as anywhere in the city. It was no great secret either that police and vice squads often raided the restrooms or conducted acts of entrapment to catch, quote, offenders in the act. In one instance in 1961, when an officer sought to apprehend a man in the restroom for trying to engage in a sexual act, the man fought back so violently that he put the arresting officer in the hospital. Like most other places at the time, if one was not sexually straight, they were either taught to be ashamed of such things, or if they weren't ashamed, they still often felt the need to conceal it against the blissfully ill-informed masses. And this restroom provided them such a place to hide that. But as gay clubs and the like popped up and became more prominent in the latter half of the 20th century, it gave people more convenient places to go rather than a dark, dank, and dirty restroom stall. A particularly troubling story related directly to the Lonsdale Square men's room happened on July 12, 1966. On this day, a man entered the restroom to the shock of finding a 6-month-old baby who'd been abandoned there. A note was attached to the infant from the presumed parents saying they couldn't afford to take care of the infant and hoped he'd find a better home. The baby was removed and taken to a foster home, his identity a complete mystery, wherein he was given the name Madison, after nearby Madison Street. To either his luck or misfortune, at the end of July his mother returned for him and adopted him back. She stated that she'd recently relocated to Portland from California and was a single mother on her own. It appears she did not get in any trouble for abandoning her infant in a dirty restroom in a rough part of town. I also stumbled onto a brief article from January 13th, 1973, referencing the death of an Arthur Mulse at the hands of a Joe Notvidad in the Lonsdale Square restroom. But aside from this brief snippet, I did not find anything further about this story. The motive, the circumstances, nothing. But, as has become commonplace in these videos, for all these rough and tragic stories, there's some funny, or even bizarre ones. This takes us back to December of 1986. It's a relatively simple, straightforward story. A man in love, attempting to charm the love of his life by renting a horse in costume and riding around Lonsdale Square near the restroom awaiting her arrival. The woman in question had agreed to marry him, but a while later, she changed her mind and never showed. The only ones who did arrive were news people and curious onlookers. The White Knight was heartbroken but steadfast in his efforts, maintaining even quite some time later that he wasn't going to give up. I guess even if it left him broke. Reading about this situation, my immediate thought was that this guy would have slayed those on the R Nice Guys subreddit. But he would not be the only, quote, good guy to grace the vicinity of the Lonsdale Square restroom.
All right, stay back. There's liable to be another one.
Police say they knew something was going to happen today because they began getting calls last night. So they placed extra men in the downtown area.
That's right. Somebody blew the sucker up. I am taking the following from court documentation on the case. It started on April 22nd, 1980, when local police received a call from someone who, seriously, identified himself as a James Bond good guy, claiming he was going to detonate a bomb somewhere in downtown Portland. The call was traced to a payphone at 3rd and Salmon, about half a block from the restroom. When police got there, the phone booth was empty. Radio silence ended at 10:13 a.m. the following day, April 23rd. The man called again. Police, who'd already been keeping an eye on the area, quickly noticed a man, dressed overly warm for the time of year, in the phone booth. Before the call could even be traced, police felt they had their man. In another call coming from that booth at 10:23 a.m., the man admitted the bomb was in the Lonsdale Square restroom. The man likely noticed by then that officers were gathering around him. He abruptly left the booth, heading towards a car he'd parked a block to the east on 2nd and Salmon. When he reached the car, he was swarmed by officers. He claimed he'd just been calling a rock shop from the payphone. Fortunately, his admittance as to where the bomb was located allowed a few precious minutes for the area around the restroom to be cleared, leading up to 10:33 a.m. when...
He indicated that he was going to start bombing again because he had received no action on his previous phone calls where he was making demands that property taxes should be lowered and Cadillac Fairview should be stopped.
Phone calls to who?
To various news stations and various individuals on the police department.
And who was this restroom bombing 007 super nice guy? Just an out-of-work former welder named Norman E. Miller. And it turned out there had been other instances similar to this one occurring in previous weeks in the city. On March 9th, a bomb went off outside of a Shell Oil headquarters, and it just so happened that a, quote, James Bond organization took credit for it. A few days later, a bomb was found outside of the local KPTV television studio. Police were called and the bomb was dismantled. And finally, on March 22nd, a massive blast was heard at the Hoyt Arboretum, wherein a large crater was ultimately found. The presumption has long been that Miller was responsible for some or all of these other events. Whether he was or not, Miller was convicted in June 1980, specifically for blasting the bricks out of the Lonsdale Square restroom, earning him a 20-year prison sentence. Certainly, in recent times, the reconstructed restroom has seen its share of vandalism, but hopefully history will not repeat itself sometime in the future at this specific location. Who would have thought that a public restroom would have so much history to it? Actually, who honestly would think a downtown public restroom wouldn't have a lot of history? I guess it just depends on who you are. The last time we were together in this series, I discussed the strange history of the Lonsdale Square restroom in downtown Portland. In this installment, where should I go next? How about right across the street? From 1909 until 1967, this was the site of what one might call a typical hotel of the time. A 2-story brick structure with an entrance along Salmon Street, just east of 4th Avenue, and business spaces on the ground floor. It went by the name of the Reed Hotel. Rarely mentioned in old newspapers and other forms of documentation, it's very possible I never would have known the Reed Hotel existed. I discovered it back in 2017 on the Slabtown Chronicle blog, written by the late, great local historian J.D. Chandler. A 2015 piece he wrote titled Murder Hotel captured my attention and delved into the most controversial period of the hotel's existence, from the 1920s into the 1940s. Oddly, there was little to no information available on the hotel's last 20 years of existence. This led me to wonder if it possibly went under a different name during those later years. And in my earlier YouTubing years, I did a short video about this place, with probably the most interesting part being, well, this guy. Yeah. For years, I couldn't find a picture showing this location during those years, which astonished me considering the prominence of the area where this hotel was located. Then, I finally found this image on Vintage Portland's picture blog. Taken in 1966, showing the intersection of 3rd and Salmon. To the far left end of the picture, we see a 2-story brick building. This is the Reed. I later found this 1949 overview image of Lonsdale Square, which shows a view of the Reed towards the right end of the photograph. Apparently, it had modern rooms. It was also in this picture that I noticed a seemingly unnecessary open space in the middle portion of the building, perhaps put there simply because they couldn't put anything else there. But being such a tight-fitted area, cut-off space with bland windows facing other bland windows, my imagination runs wild with what kind of vice may have occurred in this area and what kind of evidence may have been hidden or discarded there. After finding these two images, Without even looking, I kept finding the Reed in the background of other pictures, sometimes barely discernible, but absolutely there. Such makes so much sense, considering what the place was like. It was bland and unassuming. It almost didn't deserve a photograph of its own. It always just hid in the background. And yet, in a city full of nondescript hotels with questionable histories within their walls, the Reed was just a cut above the others, such as the Byron, where Edwin Sid Ghirardelli of the Ghirardelli chocolate family took his own life in 1912 after being sent away by his family for being gay. And, of course, many hotels on Skid Row were known for everything from gambling to prostitution to being headquarters for small criminal syndicates. And in later years, many of these places were transformed into shabby housing for the city's transient population. I'm not sure if the Reed became like these others, especially since it was closed down during the 60s, but I get the feeling it functioned much like those others in its final years. And much like in its later years, there's not a lot of information known about the first 9 or so years of the hotel's existence, other than an obvious renovation and revival done in 1915. Built in the heart of the lesser-known southwest Portland Skid Row area, known for rampant crime and violence, the Reed would end up fitting in quite well. While it didn't develop much of a crooked reputation until the 20s, crime there dated back at least as far as 1918. An investigation into police grafting led to a raid being done on the hotel that year, and in the arrest of several women, many of whom were assumed to be prostitutes. But these women were later released when the proprietress denied knowing why they were there. The page showing who had checked in during that time was also mysteriously torn out of the hotel's ledger. At this time, the Multnomah County District Attorney, Walter Evans, sought to just have the hotel shut down. But that obviously didn't happen. During this time, the hotel was run by a W.J. McLeod, whose worst crime, as far as I could find, was getting busted for illegally burning trash inside the hotel. Small potatoes compared to what was to come. So, you know how in the movie John Wick there's this hotel that he goes to where criminals and the like are protected from the outside world? Well, that's kinda what the Reed Hotel became. Control of the place fell into the hands of Jean Miller, a woman from a prominent Portland family who had fallen from grace and into a heroin addiction. She had an extensive criminal record, including narcotics and immorality charges, and thus it made sense that she'd have both numerous criminal connections as well as a desire to harbor criminals. Helping in her efforts were John Lowe, a local bootlegger, and an attorney by the name of Isidore Anklis. We'll be getting back to Anklis later. The Reed was to become a haven of bootleggers and burglars, along with various transients, sex workers, and alcoholics. Perhaps more than anything else, the Reed Hotel was a brutal representation of the struggles women faced in the earlier days of Portland. Prior to the 1900s, Portland was known as a man's town. But in the early years of the 20th century, the city saw a rush of women flock to town, living under a plethora of different circumstances. The ones who struggled the most found themselves living in squalor and generally forgotten by their fellow citizens. With the Reed being built during this spike, it would inevitably become a home to many of these lost women. In J.D. Chandler's written piece on the hotel, he noted at least 2 known instances of women leaping from their second-floor rooms, sustaining injuries, in order to escape men who had lured them there. A strong metaphor for the kind of place this was. A world of not only blue-collar criminals, but also predators. Ethel Jane Rice, buried somewhere in this grassy patch at Portland's Greenwood Hills Cemetery, ended up in Portland under the throes of alcoholism. Separated from her husband years earlier and having a child potentially out of wedlock that she put up for adoption, Ethel met James Rice in Seattle and married him. But a once content housewife had become so overcome by drink that James brought her to Portland for help in September of 1947. Instead, Ethel vanished into the night and went missing. Nobody realized that she'd checked in to the shabby Reed Hotel. And when she wasn't there, she was being picked up by random men and taken to their hotel rooms, likely being paid with money she then used to buy booze. On September 19th, while approaching the Reed, she encountered a stumbling drunk ex-con named Rutherford Beer. He asked if she was there for him, and she said yes. The two went to Beer's room inside the hotel, and a short while later he left the hotel, alone. Visiting several bars and getting more drunk, he later returned to his room to make a grisly discovery. Ethel Rice, dead on his bed. He dizzily called the police and claimed confusion. He would tell them he caught Ethel trying to steal his wallet, and he just smacked her around a few times before he stormed out to drink more, coming back and finding her dead. An analysis of Ethel's body told a different story. She had been strangled to death while sustaining a skull fracture. The official cause of death was that skull fracture, bringing on cerebral hemorrhage. The ex-con Beer would end up serving 10 years for what must have been a brutal killing, dying in a car accident himself shortly after his release. Ethel was just one of many, but one who experienced the worst of what the Reed had to offer. More than a decade later, another murder would be tied to the Reed, granted from a distance. On July 26, 1936, 49-year-old Ada Haskins was found dead in Portland's Washington Park, strangled with a piece of baling wire. It's believed she was killed the night before, and she had been living at the Reed at the time. Authorities considered the possibility that Haskins, financially broke and depressed, may have taken her own life. Her husband, Roy, had committed suicide himself only months earlier. But Ada's sister, Ava, disputed this claim, noting that Ada had been in good spirits and that she was planning on throwing a party soon. Ultimately, there became little doubt, at least to most, that this was a murder. The one thing in doubt was who was responsible. The night before she was found dead, another tenant at the Reed heard her discussing money matters with an unknown man in her room. Her room was also found locked, but her key was never found, suggesting her killer may have locked her door to keep curious parties out. She was witnessed that night getting into a car with another man. Shortly before her body was found, 2 boys in Washington Park reported seeing 2 men rushing down a trail, apparently fleeing the area. Ultimately, 2 men, also staying at the Reed, William Ray and Faye B. Wise, would come under suspicion and be grilled for hours on the matter. Ray and Wise were those classic lifelong criminals, the types to hold up a bank the day they were released from prison. Wise did time for robbing a roadhouse in 1926, and after his release in 1930, quickly went back to prison on a burglary charge. Not only were Ray and Wise also residing at the Reed, but Ray had recently loaned Ada $200. 2 IOUs were found in Ada's room, one of which was due to be paid on July 25th, the day she was presumed to be killed. It was theorized that Ray, accompanied by Wise, went to collect, but Ada did not have the money and ultimately suffered the consequences. Despite grilling for 3 days, the 2 men wouldn't break, and the police let him go. Conveniently, authorities went back to the suicide angle after this. But what are the odds that a woman would end up dead at the same time she owed a criminal money? I tried to find Ada's grave at the Multnomah Park Cemetery in southeast Portland, but was unsuccessful.
You can see a lot of these. Some of these have been, it looks like some of the ones over here have been a little bit more exposed than they have been in the past, which just kind of makes me wonder if I can find, wait, is that an H? Oh wait, is that an, I think I found it. I found her grave. Yeah, C, that was her middle initial. You can see, it's hard to make out. Ada, C, you got an H here, because I can see the, and then there's this top of an A, an S, K, I, N. And then there's an S over here. So yeah, so you can see the S even. Ada Haskins, this is definitely her grave, even though I can't really see. Did not think I would, this is not one I seriously thought I would find today. But yeah, you can see the A, like it's so muddy, but there's, you can see the outline, the H, A, S, K, I, N, S. You can make it out. And then the Ada C is more clear. Yeah. So, yeah. Found her grave. Makes sense, because the first time I was here, I thought it was more like in this area.
I'm fairly convinced at least one of these men, more likely Ray under the circumstances, was responsible for Ada Haskins' murder. Again, the Reed was a place that protected its criminals, sometimes to the point of influencing local police. Is it possible they were protecting William Ray and Faye Wise? Unless you want to believe a woman, preparing to throw a party, on the day she owed a criminal money, wandered a few miles into Washington Park and killed herself in an unnecessarily painful and rare manner, as opposed to death by gunshot or poisoning, then it was a murder. Either way, many women came and many women suffered when they stayed at the Reed Hotel. As mentioned before, attorney Isidore Ankelis was critical in the protection of criminals at the Reed, while having a sketchy reputation for defending bootleggers and the like. Ankelis was also a member of the Ex-Newsboys organization, a fraternity of sorts consisting of local men who were paperboys as kids. This organization had a surprisingly successful collection of members, including future mayors George Baker and Terry Shrunk, Portland's 2 longest-serving mayors. By 1934, it had appeared that Ankelis' days of corruption were over when he was disbarred on a forgery charge, but he would later be reinstated on a probationary status. A slap on the wrist, allowing him to get back to his dirty deeds. However, just a couple years later, the bottom truly fell out. In the summer of 1938, it was discovered that Ankelis was the brains behind a kidnap syndicate. Both he and hotel proprietress Jane Miller would be arrested in relation to this. They had sent 2 goons, Anthony Gargulio and Lee W. Tomlinson, out to apprehend Thomas Lowe, a well-to-do farmer from Idaho. These 2 men posed as federal agents and abducted him, keeping him hostage until Lowe agreed to pay almost $1,000 for his release. Gargulio and Tomlinson were staying at the Reed regularly during this time, leading to Jane Miller's charge specifically being harboring fugitives, wanted for kidnapping. Anklis would be found guilty on his charge and received a sentence of a year and a day. Fairly charitable for a crooked lawyer connected to a federal crime. Miller would also be convicted, only to have that conviction voided before being retried and, again, found guilty for her involvement. She was able to pay a fee of $500 to avoid jail time. At least, that's what it said she did. I'm not sure what effect this had on her running of the Reed, or how much longer she was in control of it. Anklis ultimately relocated to Los Angeles, where, according to a 1950 article, he still couldn't keep himself out of trouble. It also said that, by this time, he was running a cigar store. Something tells me being on probation and running a kidnap syndicate was the final nail in his coffin in terms of work as a practicing attorney. He would pass away in 1967. Strangely enough, the same year that the Reed closed down. Clearly, with cases like the brutal murder of Ethel Jane Rice in 1947, the Reed did not turn a corner by the end of the 30s. But as far as its final years, leading up to its 1967 closure, the Reed story is a mystery. I haven't uncovered any more serious crimes that occurred there during its final years, and I'm led to believe it was just another slowly dying, cheap spot for alcoholics, transients, and folks that were just generally down on their luck to crash at. It beats sleeping on the streets. Looking at the building, I also wonder what businesses existed on the ground floor level. I would predict at least one bar was there once upon a time, or even a pawn shop or two, considering the area. The 1949 picture of the area clearly indicates that an antique shop was located in one of these store spaces, at least at that time. And while it's blurry, it appears to me that in the 1966 picture that there was a thrift shop located there. I also found that a gay bar known as the Little Brown Jug was located at a spot that may have been the westernmost space of the Reed. However, it did have a 4th Avenue address, and the Reed building faced Salmon Street, so this bar may have just been behind that building. Regardless, there were several gay bars within a block of the Reed at various times, along with the Lonsdale Square restroom right across the street, another site known for what were called clandestine gay encounters back then. While I haven't found any info to back it, I wonder, particularly in its later years, the 50s and 60s, if the Reed became another place for gay men to rendezvous under concealed circumstances. Alright, so here's the thing, is, nowadays, most of us know not to just share our personal information, our address, our phone number, all that stuff. Well, back in the day, that wasn't considered much of a problem, again, probably because social media and things like that didn't exist to show us a lot more about the crazy people out there. But that was one of the things I loved, is a lot of newspapers up into the 1930s, they always gave you, if they had the address to someplace, they gave it to you. So you knew exactly where an event happened, you knew where the people involved lived. Heck, if there was like a crime happened and a witness was nearby, they would give you the home address of that witness. So for whatever reason, if I wanted to look back at a witness, I could literally know exactly where they lived. Now, again, kind of in the 1930s and going into the 1940s, newspaper articles, again, that's, primary resource for me in a lot of my videos, they started becoming a little bit more vague in terms of where events happen. You started not seeing addresses as often. You even stopped seeing names. So if something happened at, say, a hotel, a lot of times they would just say like, oh, such and such happened at a downtown Portland hotel, or even just a Portland hotel. So a lot of times you didn't have the name of the hotel, you didn't have the address. You didn't even have a particular part of town that it was in. Like if it's in downtown, okay, what part of downtown? Down by where PSU is today, Chinatown, the waterfront, the Alphabet District, all that fringe of downtown. I think that's definitely the biggest roadblock in a story such as this one, is once you get into the 30s and beyond, that information that you kind of need starts becoming less and less common, and things can happen, but you don't know exactly where they're happening at. And so in the case of the Reed Hotel, really, the latest story I found is 1948, the Ethel Jane Rice case, and that's simply because it was in J.D. Chandler's written piece on it. But the hotel was open for another 20 years, almost, after Jane Rice was killed. And for that period of time, I literally didn't find one single story in relation to that hotel, at least one that I could positively tie to the Reed.
There really may be a lot more lost and forgotten history to this place than we realize. And then again, we may know all of its most intriguing points. But, for a time, this unremarkable little hole in the wall was one of the scariest, most corrupt and violent places in town. And that is, if not totally complete, the history of the Reed Hotel, demolished back in the late 1960s. And as is often the case, once I reach the conclusion of one video in this series, I start wondering, what should I cover next? What should I cover next? This is the Lotus, or the Lotus Hotel, or the Lotus Card Room, or the Lotus Cafe. Look at it. Not much to look at, right? I can't imagine when this building first opened as the cheap Albion Hotel in 1906 that its creators had any idea the intrigue and often strange history that would engulf this place over its 112-year existence. In July 2018, the beloved, if not gorgeous, Lotus was reduced to ashes, and I made sure to be there to watch it. During this time, I didn't know a lot about this place and its sordid history. It was demolished, along with another of my favorites in the city, the Ancient Order of United Workmen Temple, to make way for new, ugly architecture. So saith this Facebook post I made at the time. The temple went down slow, and the new hotel in its place went up fast. The plan for the Lotus site was a combination office building and hotel. As far as I'm concerned, there was some sketchy practices going on in this case, but as is often the case, the demolishers won. As quickly as was allowed, the Lotus disappeared forever. And yet, if you return to this site today, in 2023, you may notice something interesting. The site remains empty. No office, no hotel. It appears the plans for this site ran into some problems. It's sad when the desires to get rid of old structures is so strong that it's done before the replacement project is fully ready to go. Because if it was, there'd be a fucking building here right now. But there's not.
And all we have for the time being is the shell of what would have been the Lotus's reportedly haunted basement, with a few tunnels leading out to the sidewalks. The last time this spot was empty was 1906. It was the year after the Lewis and Clark exposition, and the city of Portland was at the beginning of a population explosion, an explosion that led to a hotel boom that went on through the 1910s, and the 1906 Albion was one of the earliest structures made during that boom. Like many, it was a modest 3-story brick structure that once had a cornice going around it. White staining in the decades after remained as a reminder of this. And, of course, there was commercial space on the ground floor. I'm not sure exactly what existed here in those early days, but historical documentation suggests it was retail space, or, oddly enough, possibly factory space? Somehow I doubt that. Those early years of the Albion were not exactly a picture of hotel elegance. What could you really expect from a place offering $7 a month rooms? Most stories I found related to it pre-1924, of which there were few, paint a rather depressing picture of the place. Many were health notices, such as a Mrs. Ishmael, who was very ill and staying at the Albion, a J. Isage, who was dying of tuberculosis while staying there, and a Margaret McGinnis, who died in her room there, believed due to her alcoholism. And honestly, she probably wasn't the only one to die that way at the Lotus. But perhaps the most disturbing story I heard came from 1914 when a local bookstore owner, L.W. Highland, was found dead in his room. It was reported he died of a hemorrhage of the lungs, which I didn't even know was a thing. And then there were guys like H.C. Marston, downtrodden enough to be staying at the Albion in 1913, but lucky enough to be carrying $50 in gold on him. So what did he do? He drank himself into a stupor in his room before going missing. He was later found on the steps of the county courthouse, 2 blocks away, babbling that a highwayman had attacked and robbed him of his gold. You know, now that I think about it, I doubt this guy had any gold in the first place. On February 16, 1927, 41 patrons of the hotel had to be evacuated when a fire broke out in the basement of the building, causing damage to the spaces on the first floor. It's believed the fire was caused by sparks from the furnace striking some nearby kindling. According to an interview with a Harold Onishi about his Japanese family's experience in Portland, he noted that his family ran and operated the Lotus Hotel at the start of the 1940s, and it appears in the years before that, other persons of Japanese descent also ran this hotel, possibly back into the late 20s when this fire happened. In Onishi's story, he includes the tragic details of when his family was forced to relocate to internment camps during World War II. He even mentioned how they burned any items tying them to their native Japan in their stove, in their room at that hotel, to make it look like they had no loyalty to their native Japan when the authorities came. Despite being the peak of prohibition, the Lotus Cafe opened in 1924, functioning much like a soda shop and, let's be honest, probably sneaking booze to their patrons on the side. One website mentioned a booze bust at the Lotus back in 1927, of which the cafe's first owner, Peter Riken, denied any knowledge of. It's important to realize that while the city's known Skid Row was to the north around Burnside Street, there was another Skid Row in this area. The part of town surrounding the Lotus was known for its prostitution, bootlegging, and petty crime. Ex-cons were everywhere, as were transients. It should be of no surprise then that after the Lotus Cafe and Card Room opened and the hotel upstairs was renamed the Lotus, that it was heavily rumored the hotel was secretly operating as a brothel, specifically a Depression-era brothel. With its close proximity to City Hall and the county courthouse just blocks away, the Lotus became a gathering spot for city officials and personnel from the mayor's office. Some of these people spent time in the Lotus's back bar, which, after the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, became a more exclusive spot, reserved for high-up government officials and the like. The rumor was that some of these individuals, when they were done at the bar, would go up a concealed stairwell to the hotel above and take advantage of its brothel-like benefits. While these are still rumors, I have a tendency to believe in them considering what the area was like back then, and I know for a fact that, at least in later years, the hotel was being used by sex workers to turn tricks. But I'll get to that. A passage in Portland historian and writer Phil Stanford's book, Rose City Vice, noted that in 1911, of the 547 hotels, apartments, and rooming houses in the city, 431 of them were, quote, wholly given up to immorality. So it would be of no surprise to me that a little spot like the Albion/Lotus Hotel would have had a little extra action going on. But for some of the secrets it may have held, the Lotus was not all dark. Its status as having a card room was heavily utilized, and the bar's clientele attracted a little of everyone, especially loggers. It was also a favored spot for shipyard workers during World War II, and its gorgeous bar had a bit of a history itself. Originally built in 1880 by the Chicago-based Brunswick Company, when the bar was moved to the West Coast, it was actually shipped all the way down and around South America before landing in a few other cities before finally becoming a staple of the Lotus in 1962. Upon its arrival, it reportedly had a bullet hole in it. When the Lotus closed down, the bar was saved and relocated to the McMinimans at the Baghdad Theater in southeast Portland. During the Lotus Cafe's renaissance, so to speak, during the 40s and into the 50s, it not only drew lots of everyday workers, but was reportedly a spot where gangsters loved to hang out. On occasion, Big Jim Elkins would spend time there. Elkins was the closest thing the city of Portland ever had to a real, true crime boss, in the likes of a Carlos Marcello or a Sam Giancana. Granted, Elkins never came close to their level. He came to Portland in the late 1930s, and in only a few short years, he went from whorehouse proprietor to the city's head crime boss, mixed up in everything from bootlegging to prostitution to gambling to dealing drugs. But by the 1950s, Elkins got himself mixed up in some Teamster-related drama that went south fast. He would make the decision to go public with his crimes in order to protect himself, unveiling a web of citywide corruption so massive that it sparked a Senate investigation that would prove to be a massive embarrassment to the city and bring an end to Big Jim's crime boss days. But if he was spending time at the Lotus in those days, you can bet he wasn't just there for the atmosphere. One could say the rough elements never fully left the Lotus, at least until the 1990s. As the 50s faded into the 60s, crime in the vicinity of the Lotus grew once again, and the hotel upstairs never really shook its seedy reputation. By the 60s, it functioned like most Skid Row-esque hotels, with the most destitute of destitute living within its walls. And remember how I said earlier that prostitution was definitely going on at the Lotus in later years? Well, I primarily get this from a passage in the book Behind the Badge in River City by former Portland police officer and detective Don Dupay, which I highly recommend and have personally read twice. In this passage, he discusses apprehending a sex worker while he worked on the Vice Squad back in the 60s. He described being picked up by a bony woman, clearly on drugs, and going back to her room on the second floor of the Lotus. He discusses the rickety staircase going up, the windows covered with grime, the stench of booze and urine in the hallway, and the filthy room they went into with drug paraphernalia scattered around. He even mentioned how the front desk person paid them no attention as they entered, indicating he knew full well the space upstairs was being used for sex work. It wasn't exactly a rarity in places like this at that time. And in 1968, even a case of murder would be connected to the Lotus. On April 25th of that year, a local boxer and pimp named Carlos Mendoza would be found shot to death in a stolen car out near the Portland International Airport. It was learned that a few days earlier, on the 20th, Mendoza had brutally beaten up a sex worker named Donna Chadwick. Chadwick was one of Michael Wright's girls, and Michael Wright's stepdad was local crime thug Vince Capitan, known in crime circles as the Iceman. When Chadwick told Wright what had happened, he grabbed a gun and left, saying he was going to kill Mendoza. It's believed Mendoza was tricked into thinking he was going out to rob a pharmacy and was picked up by someone in a stolen 1956 Chevy. They were followed by Wright in another car to the kill site, where they left Mendoza in the stolen car and left in the car Wright was driving. Capitan would serve 10 years in connection with this crime, and after going on the run as far away as New Orleans, Michael Wright was finally caught and sentenced to life for his involvement. Strangely enough, he would be paroled after 2 years on the insistence of the presiding judge and prosecutor. Nothing sketchy there. Wright would go on to run the needlessly controversial Cindy's bookstore in Chinatown before being forced to close it down, and when the building was demoed, he opened up the land to the city's homeless. He has since stated that he's left his criminal life behind him. However, this murder case is only tied to the Lotus as a possible motive for the killing. It's also thought Mendoza was cooperating with authorities in a larceny case against Wright, which may have been the actual motive for killing him. Regardless, exactly a decade later, a murder would happen within the Lotus itself. On October 28, 1978, a bar patron, Thomas Lipari, had the cops called on him by bartender Cletus Mitz after having a verbal altercation with another customer. According to Lipari, he was then roughed up by police who reported to the scene as Mitz was spewing expletives at him. Vengeful, he later returned to the Lotus and gunned down Mitz in cold blood. After going away to prison, Lipari would be released in 1987, at which time he had found Jesus, like they all do. The 70s were certainly a rough time for the Lotus, at least the hotel, which had just evolved further into a status as a true flophouse. Most who stayed there were alcoholics or elderly men, some of which had probably relocated there in the aftermath of the city's massive South Auditorium urban renewal project, which leveled several blocks on the southern end of downtown. This displaced several elderly men living in the rundown hotels of that area. During these projects, the Lotus was barely spared, and even in the mid-70s there was talk of demolishing the place for the sake of progress and a newer, better Portland. This came one step closer to becoming a reality in 1976 when, against extensive backlash, the hotel was closed down for not being brought up to code. The city had become fiercely strict on old hotels following the rules in the aftermath of the Pomona Hotel fire that killed a dozen people in the summer of 1975. It was believed many of these victims died simply because there were no fire doors in the building, something that had recently become a requirement. After the hotel's closure in '76, I'm not sure exactly how much those upper floors were used. When I first saw it in person in 2016, it was clear those floors had been vacant for a while. The bar remained just another spot for people to go until it was purchased in 1990 by John Plew, who took advantage of the place's divey appearance and converted the old card room into more of a nightclub space. Eventually, it became a pretty hip night spot. Local politicians, including mayors, began hanging out there again, and even the odd celebrity. According to Plew, Madonna showed up one night, and even Daryl Hall and John Oates came in after a show. George Clinton also showed up one night and got so drunk that he vomited in the restroom, sparking a heartfelt apology the following day. It ain't always glitz and glamour. And speaking of glamour, the Lotus has a few connections to the silver screen. While Madonna popped into the Lotus one night, she also filmed some scenes for the 1992 film Body of Evidence there, but they were deleted from the final production. While shooting the 1988 film Drugstore Cowboy, Gus Van Sant and Matt Dillon were frequently seen at the Lotus. And the Lotus also served as a significant backdrop in the hard-to-hate film from 1993 called Brain Smasher, starring Andrew Dice Clay and Terry Hatcher. In the film, a bouncer, played by Clay, lived in the run-down Lotus Hotel, and in it we can actually see interiors of how the place looked during the 90s. It definitely still had some charm to it in its later years. Even up into the new millennium, and its final years leading up to the building's ultimate closure in 2016, the Lotus remained a fairly popular hotspot to dance and get a drink. Its closure definitely broke a lot of hearts, especially considering the fact that it appears now it was demolished for no reason. When the demolition crew finally arrived, I was there on 2 occasions, staying as long as I possibly could and capturing a video record of this iconic place's dying moments. Periodically, I was able to capture a glimpse through the rubble of what the interior looked like there at the end. And since that summer, some 5 years ago, we have been left with an empty basement hole at that corner on 3rd and Salmon. And while it's old hat now, when the rubble was cleared, unveiling these gorgeous brick-lined tunnels leading out of the basement area, everyone's imaginations, even mine for a moment, went wild with thoughts of the Shanghai tunnels in Old Town. Some have even tried to push the idea online that these are a continuation of those very tunnels, when in reality they're very short tunnels leading to freight elevators below the sidewalks. Just a relic from years past. But this hasn't stopped stories from spreading, suggesting the most infamous haunted story related to the Lotus, that being an angry spirit in the basement, is also related to Shanghai tunnel lore, because of the tunnels. It's been suggested victims to be shanghaied were lured down into the basement, and perhaps an intended victim died down there and now haunts the space. There are also several haunted elements tied to the hotel, such as mysterious footsteps, doors creaking, and a sense that something or someone is there with you. Honestly, this makes more sense considering how many people probably died in that hotel over the years.
Back in downtown along 3rd, I'm going to go back to the former site of the Lotus. I was there a couple months ago, but I just kind of breezed by, and these are all the park blocks through here. Actually, Lonsdale Square restroom just a little bit that way. The Reed Hotel would have been just across the street from it, and the Lotus is right down here. Here we are, the site of history, at least history that once was, and it's still just an empty lot next to the auditorium here with that for sale sign there, which leads me to further think the project that was going to happen here has probably been canceled. I found an article from like 2021, I think, that said it had been postponed. That may have been in relation to COVID, but the fact of the matter is they implied they were going to jump right on this project the moment that this building was gone, and here we are some 5 years later and it's still just empty. I also want to come out here just to take a little bit to kind of show what's still here, because there's still interesting aspects left out here for people to see, whatever that was over there. But yeah, you can see the brick that would have been, I'm assuming this would have been the wall down in the basement. I mean, the building was brick. So yeah, you can see, and there's pipes and whatnot here. Like, there's still a little old piece of wood down there. There's still bricks from the building off in the distance there. Wish I could hop in there, but I don't want to take the risk. I don't know if I'd be able to get out. There's still bricks down in there. You can see the bricks lining here, and of course the thing that attracts everybody's attention, which are these tunnels that some people have still tried to argue are connected to the Shanghai tunnels, which are many, 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 many blocks that way. And here's the hotel that replaced the United Order of Workmen Temple. That went up real fast, so I assume the same would happen here. But yeah, you can stand here and look, and you can literally see from my angle, I don't know how well it shows up, but there's a wall there about 10-12 feet back from the start of the tunnel. This tunnel goes nowhere. That tunnel, you can literally see the wall right there. That tunnel goes nowhere. These were used, like a lot of businesses, so that you could bring in, inventory, things of that nature, in through the basement without dealing with all the drama up here on the street. Is a very common thing back in the day, and they use these freight elevators up on the sidewalk. Put the stuff on there, elevator goes down, you can bring it in here. But some people still want to believe there's a Shanghai tunnel connection, but literally, like, right here, here's a tunnel. You get right to the other side of this, and what do we see? Oh, nothing. Well, this one's gone. Okay, well, that was a bust. But yeah, you saw there was another tunnel right up over here, and what happens to be right here? This. And you see that tunnel here. 1, 2, 3, directly 3 of these down. And what is on the sidewalk right there? Oh, well, you look at that. It's a little freight elevator. And it lines up perfectly with the tunnel right there. And it actually makes sense that there's a couple of these because there were multiple businesses in this tiny building functioning at once. And I think, you know, the bar was more towards the front here and then the hotel was up here. But I think there were even businesses towards the back there. So with multiple businesses, it makes sense that you'd have multiple entries because different businesses would be bringing in different inventory.